Oh my gosh! No way!
What is this?
No
What
way.
is this?
I am shocked.
Hello and welcome to this surprise episode of God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm educator and impish rapscallion Giles Gough.
And I'm librarian and mistress of mischief, Julia Hall.
And today, for this sneaky April Fool's episode, we will be looking at Season 3 of The Chosen, the first multi-season retelling of the life of Jesus and the people he chose to follow him. And once again, we're joined by yet another co-host of such lethal cunning.
Hello, Oh gosh, I'll do that again. Hello, I'm RE teacher and daring iconoclast, Louisa Jane Smith. I was so focused on saying iconoclast properly, I forgot to say my
that is staying in the
job name.
episode. I'm not going to cut that out. I love it.
I'm feeling sad that I don't have my own special introduction.
I mean, it would have to be boob related, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm like 65 episodes into these, which means I must have thought of 120 interesting introductions.
I'll come up with my own.
And Claire is here, which is also nice, I guess.
Thanks, love.
And as we're filming this back to back, Cassidy Gough, the youngest Gough, the last Gough Spring, is also with us. So if you hear him crying and wailing in the background,
Gnashing of teeth.
yeah,
That he doesn't have yet.
then
Gnashing of gums.
that's him. Okay. So, Julia, I feel you've probably had the most interesting experience on this front because I gave you an out. You didn't have to watch season 3 if you didn't want to, but you were like, no, let's do it. So you have mainlined all of The Chosen from the first episode up to season 3 finale
Directly into
First
our
of all,
eyeballs.
well done.
Yeah.
Well done. And what did you think of the show?
I did enjoy it. It is a completely unique piece of media. I don't think, and for reference, my kind of experience of religious media was The Prince of Egypt in an RE class one time.
Which, to be fair, is pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
So my expectations
I've
were
never
pretty
seen it.
high, considering I'm coming off of Prince of Egypt, which is an elite piece of Christian media.
So was the lack of Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston quite disappointing for you?
I mean, where was the singing? I mean, there was some singing, but like,
Come on, there was a little Jimi Hendrix guitar riff at the old feeding of the 5,000, which I did appreciate. And I'd take
piece of soundtrack was
Jimmy
actually
over
really good.
Mariah every day.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I am a bit disappointed that like Big James and Little James weren't like a little kind of bar duo situation.
Jesus
but
does
there's
strike
time.
me as someone who would like karaoke. I could absolutely 100% imagine that.
What would be like his signature
What would be his
piece at
song?
karaoke?
What would be his signature song? I
know this.
To say...
He'd sing "Are You Gonna Go My Way" by Lenny Kravitz.
Oh, ask him when you meet him.
This is the kind of thing you learn when you put the research into
Dallas
the
Jenkins.
stuff.
You need one thing, and one thing only.
Fantastic. Now it's time for Julia's facts.
Yeah. I've got a couple, a little sprinkling.
A soupçon.
So the first 2 episodes of this season actually had a box office theatrical release, which grossed at $14.4 million, which is more than Glass Onion made, and more than Pearl as well, which was a pretty, I feel like, mostly mainstream horror film that came out in the same time. But Glass Onion, Jesus is more popular than Benoit Blanc, which, I mean, does make sense.
That is a team up I would love to see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you imagine? Like Benoit is like, how very interesting. This happened. He's like, yeah, it's that guy over there. How do you? Well, I asked my father, and he said it's that guy. So it's that guy. Can we?
Very short film.
I have places to go, and more.
Yeah, I got
can we wrap
karaoke
this
at
up,
10.
please?
Can we, let's wrap this up.
Oh, I've got this image now of Jesus trying to convince me to be brave and do karaoke, which I'm just not gonna do.
You would. If Jesus asked you, you would.
If Jesus asked me, I would,
Yeah.
and it would be Jumpin' Jack Flash by.
Come
by the
on, he's
Rolling
already thought
Stones.
about it. He's just waiting to be asked.
Or Roses by Outkast. Nat. That's the one that me and Nat used to sing at karaoke. So, yeah. Terrifying times. Okay. Yes, Julia, have you got any more facts?
So one of the big scenes, one of the big moments in season 3 is obviously when Jesus feeds the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Rather than what's common with crowds of this size is that you can fill them in with CGI. Rather than do that, though, they are going to do things by halves. Fans stepped in to be the extras. So there are, I think, maybe about 12,000 people, but there are at least, that is a crowd of 5,000 genuine, actual human people, many of whom came at their own expense and sewed their own costumes, representing all 50 states and 36 countries. So, because when I looked at this episode, I went, wow, this episode's an hour and a half. Why is this so much longer than all the other ones? And it's because it's about 15 to 20 minutes of credits, because there's this massive contribution section of what I assume is all of these people. And this is men, women, kids who basically went, yeah, we want to be in The Chosen, and upped and went to set, which I think is so cool.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And there's a great behind the scenes video of this as well, where I assume just after they'd finished rapping for this scene, Jonathan Rumi gets up and is like, this feels like an appropriate moment to sort of pray with you all. So here's Our Father in first century Aramaic, and just rattles off the Our Father in first century Aramaic, which, if that's not dedication to the role and to being Jesus, I don't know what is. That was just so cool to me.
Well done, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome sauce.
And then my last fact, so for seasons 1 and 2, they were filming in a variety of different places. But for season 3, they've actually managed to get a permanent home, which is built in Texas, and it includes a replica first century village, a soundstage, and its own lake, covering about 900 acres in total, which is massive.
Yeah, that's badass.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for those, Julia. Those were wicked. Now, I'll be honest, guys, finding guests is the hardest part of this show. So if I can get like 2 for 1, then I'm quite happy, So we've got a guest. You might have already worked out who it's going to be. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Andy Godfrey. I'm a film critic for Sorted magazine, the world's leading Christian magazine for men, and it's a privilege to write for that magazine. And I'm also a full-time evangelist living in Milton Keynes. So if anybody's ever around or needs a full-time evangelist or a film reviewer, do get in touch. And
Hang on. If you need a film reviewer, please come to me first.
Giles
Andy
first.
is absolutely doing fine for reviews. Some of us are absolutely clawing at the bottom of the ladder here, trying to get on.
Giles is busy. He'll send you to my mate Mark Fairbanks.
Andy, thank you once again for our back-to-back interview from The Chosen. It's brilliant. So, you got to interview for the cast for season 4, and one of the people you got to speak to was the gentleman who plays Peter. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're going with Shahar for his pronunciation of his first name, Isaac. Yeah, I was in a room with him and also the guy who plays his brother, Andrew, and we had great fun. I mean, I only had 10 minutes with these two guys. But I have to say, Giles, these two were great fun. They were bouncing off each other. They were teasing each other. We were laughing. I was asking the guy who plays Andrew about his cats, because apparently he misses his cats like crazy when he's away from home. And Shahar was teasing him about that. So we had great fun. And I really enjoyed meeting these guys. Absolutely. So I was asking him about the dynamic of the relationship through the various seasons. Because it was Andrew initially introduces Peter to Jesus, and how the dynamic of the relationship has changed, not just between the disciples on screen, but between the actors as a group. And it really is interesting because he said as the seasons have gone on, and particularly in season 3, as Peter's beginning to gain more and more prominence, one or two of the other actors are sort of starting to treat him in that way. A little bit jealous almost of the fact that he's becoming a little bit more prominent, in the role, and a little bit more prominent on the screen. And of course, I did ask him if he'd like to see the Book of Acts filmed, and he said, yeah, because that would give me a role and none of the others would be in it.
Give me more work,
Exactly.
yeah.
And of course, none of the others would be in it. I also asked him what his favourite scene to film was, and he said it was the walking on the water scene, which I think is season 3.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Was that scene? That scene took 4 days out in a boat on a lake late at night to film. They were wet, they were cold, they were tired. More than once, he sort of had to step into the water, appear to drown, get out, be dried off, get back in the water again, get out, for different takes. And the guy who plays Andrew said, "Oh, we had great fun watching that. We were all safe and sound in the boat."
The things we do for art,
So he said that was his favourite scene to film, and probably I mean, it's so brilliantly done when you watch that episode. It is really, really powerful, where we see that it's when you keep your eyes on Jesus, you walk on water, and take your eyes off Jesus and you drown. And I think that the scene is beautifully shot. But he said we did get very, very cold, and he said I did get very, very wet. And of course, the others took great delight in
that. Were there any other interviews that sort of jumped out at you? Anything that's still staying with you, even
obviously,
weeks after?
I got to interview Jonathan Ruby, who plays Jesus, and I was asking him. And one of the questions I asked him was, "What's unique about your portrayal of Jesus over the 4 seasons compared to, say, Robert Powell or any other actor who's played Jesus?" And he said, "I'm trying to bring out the balance between the divinity of Jesus and the humanity of Jesus. We want to see Jesus eating a meal. We want to see him laughing. We want to see him getting annoyed when he stubs his toe. We want to see him, the human side of Jesus. We want to see him getting so frustrated with the disciples. At the same time, we want to see his power and his divinity." And Jonathan Rumi is a committed Christian. And I said to him, "Is playing Jesus, does it come with a heavy responsibility then?" And he actually said, "Yes, it does." He said it's a very heavy responsibility because we're talking about the Son of God and we want to get him right. We don't want him to be seen as a comic character. At the same time, we don't want him to be seen as somebody who couldn't relate to people at a human level. So it is he was just very, very gracious, very quiet. I mean, I interviewed him at 4:20 in the afternoon. And he'd been sat in a hotel room asking questions all day, and he looked a bit tired to me. He probably, "Oh no, not one more guy coming to ask me a whole bunch of the same old questions." But we had a really lovely time, and I also got to interview the guy who plays Matthew. And of course, one of the interesting things, in particularly season 3, and this goes on into season 4, is that Matthew and Peter, within the dynamic of the group of disciples, have a falling out. They don't like each other. And one of the reasons Peter doesn't like Matthew is because he's been working for the Romans. And the chap who plays Matthew was saying to me, Paris Patel was saying to me that it's been lovely because him and Shamar, who plays Peter, have become great friends off set. And therefore, to see this relationship where they actually have to portray the fact they don't like each other, they don't get on, it's been really interesting. And they're giving each other hugs afterwards, after the filming of the scenes, particularly during season 3. I was so pleased to meet Paris Patel because he was in La La Land, and it's one of my favourite films of all time.
I'm a big believer in only taking method acting so far. I think you've got to be professional and sort of be warm and sort of supportive to people, and you're probably going to get a better performance out of them rather than, well, my character doesn't like you, so I don't like you either, which feels exhausting.
It does. And I think that one of the impressions that I got from interviewing 5 people, and in fact I've interviewed 6 people, because I interviewed George Harrison, who played James, and he's a real live wire. Being the name George Harrison, he's a Liverpool supporter. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the real George Harrison was an Everton fan. I mean, I just didn't have the heart to tell him. But watching the dynamic between the group, they obviously all get on well. And it was interesting talking to Jonathan Ramey, because I said to him, "Do you pray on set?" And he said, "Yes, I do, but not everybody in the show is a Christian." So he said, "We have to respect the religious on the set of The Chosen. We have to respect the religious beliefs of the other actors who may be Muslim or may be atheist. So we have to respect them." He said, "They're doing an acting job. That's what they're being paid to do." But he said, "We do pray for them." And I just found that really interesting as well. And then maybe those of us who are Christians and pray, we can pray, and we're watching The Chosen. Let's pray for the actors who aren't Christians as they're sitting listening to the teaching of Jesus. And spoiler alert, as they see the crucifixion and resurrection, maybe they'll come to faith. Who knows?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you're hiring people for a job and you're trying to find out what their beliefs are first, then you're going to end up with a substandard product, which is what Christian media has had
Tell me about it.
Historically
So
since forever.
And Christian films, Giles, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I love promoting films like Risen. And in fact, I'm doing an introduction to it in the church in a few weeks' time where it's being screened down in Essex. And that's why I love promoting The Chosen, because the quality of acting in The Chosen, the quality of direction, the quality of the sets. There's a scene in season 4 where Jesus takes them to Caesarea Philippi. And just a couple of years ago, I was in the real Caesarea Philippi. And they've done an incredible job recreating it. So I think the quality of the production values on The Chosen are something that make it stand out. And clearly this bunch of actors are having a great time. They don't want it to end. I mean, they do want the Book of Acts to be filmed and so on. They just don't want it to end. They want the ongoing adventures of Thomas, the ongoing adventures of Matthew, And there are stories to be told because we've got church tradition about what happened to those guys. So who knows what direction it'll go in. But great bunch of guys. Great bunch of guys.
Andy, thank you so much for talking to us today. Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Well, as I say, I'm going down to a church in a few weeks' time in Essex, a place called Abridge. It's a village church, but we're turning the church into a cinema for the day. So in the afternoon, we've got a special screening of Risen for senior citizens with popcorn and hot dogs. And I'm doing an introduction to the film. And then in the evening, we're showing it again for everybody, again with popcorn and hot dogs. So really looking forward to that. Can I also just plug Sorted Magazine, Giles? We're coming up to our 100th issue. Go to Sorted Magazine online, you'll find us. Great magazine to give to men. And it's coming up on issue 100. Please pray for our editor, Steve Legg. Many people will know that name. Steve's been battling with terminal cancer. He had laser surgery this week on some lesions on his brain. He's doing well, doing amazingly well, actually. And he's written a fabulous book called The Last Laugh, which is about a Christian who's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. You have to read it. It's just a must read. I hopefully in the next few months have got a book coming out as well. Maybe we'll be able to contemplate that at some time. And the book's called Confessions of a Christian Film Critic. Hopefully coming your way by July.
Thank you so much, Andy. That's great.
God bless you.
So that was Andy Godfrey. Julia, what do you think?
I'm just super excited because now you and I and all of us here, we are only 1 degree of separation away from Jonathan Ramey, i.e. Jesus himself. I may have been distracted by that thought and thought about only that and not much else. But how cool is that he was able to be in the same room as these guys? I'm so jealous.
I think it's nice that actually what he kind of brings out is that if you're a human and you quite often go, why does this happen to me and not happen to someone else, or why does that happen to them and not happen to me? And that's kind of that storyline, isn't it? And actually the whole of this series is a lot about seeming injustice and why God chooses some and not others, and some people get to do great things and some people do less so, and some people get healed and some people don't. And I think that's kind of a running theme. And I love the fact that there were pals in real life. Is it Peter and James? Matthew.
Matthew.
No. Yeah. So many disciples, so many names. that's really lovely that they could portray animosity on film, but actually we're great friends outside. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like they have a lot of fun on set, doesn't it? And have a good time, which is always nice to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Now it's time for finding their faith in the film. The one thing that appealed to me most was the idea that following Jesus then has an entirely different set of challenges compared to following Jesus now. So in first century Israel, as we can see, the idea of things being done supernaturally doesn't quite throw people in the same way it does then. People are just looking at it and going, yes, well, he's healed him. Well, maybe he's a prophet, or maybe he's a trickster, or maybe he's sort of maybe he's got his power from the devil or something. But they're not actually arguing about the healing itself,
whether it happened.
Yeah, and it's and I think what we saw was a really fascinating thing from like Eden's perspective, and also, and by extension, sort of Simon's perspective, where that Jesus is who he says he is. You've seen it happen. You've looked into his eyes. You've heard the teaching, and you're following him. But this horrendous thing happened to you, and why did that happen to you? And why are other people?
Yeah.
Why do other people get off easy? Do you know what I mean? It reminded me of a line early on in The Shack, where God, played by, I think it's Viola Davis, says, "Your problem isn't whether you think that I'm God or not. Your problem is whether you think I'm good or not."
Yeah. I think it's harder in some ways when you really believe in Jesus and you know that he's real and you know God is real, when things like that happen. Because it's like, well, I know God could have stopped this and he chose not to. And that is really difficult to deal with. Because then that really challenges your belief in God's goodness, because it's like, well, if he's good and he loves me and has the power to make this not to stop this, then why would he allow this to happen? That is a very difficult question to grapple with.
And I think that's the through line of the entirety of season 3 really, is watching Simon's journey. I mean, like, Simon is one of the first characters we meet, so he's like our POV character with his beautiful silky hair and his thick arms.
He's a beautiful man.
Oh,
I know, right?
Yes.
Dude needs to have a word with himself,
Yes.
Tone it down, or at least
start
tell us
wearing
what your hair
sleeves.
care regime
It's
is.
so distracting.
Do you need a minute,
I need
Louisa?
if I'm quiet, you'll know why. Just
Is it Prince Namor from Wakanda Forever all over again for you?
Yeah, a little bit. But I think it's interesting because actually it's in a context where men are just starting to be able to talk about mental health and things like that. He kind of depicts kind of 21st century men in that actually I'm just going to be grumpy and not talk to anyone and bury it and pretend everything's okay. So it's so relatable. It's so relatable to some people's experiences of battling with something. It's almost like Eden needs permission to be angry. And actually she's got a husband who is just kind of burying his head in the sand, and I think it's very relatable.
What I enjoyed as well was that the female characters are flawed too, in the sense of having small sort of character flaws, and I don't mean flawed as in it becomes a character arc thing like Mary kind of falling off the wagon like in the last season. It's the fact that Eden seems to say that she kind of feels like Simon should have just read her mind when he came back, and that the awkwardness of the you were
you were right, I was wrong, I'm sorry, and I don't know. It
Yeah.
showed, how can I put it? In sometimes in times when we're looking at like first century people, particularly first century men, where it's a heavily patriarchal system, and they are, let's be fair, total dumbasses sometimes. That the women characters are often portrayed as being particularly wise, and in the case of like Mary Magdalene, I'd almost argue excessively wise and calm and the rest of it. And it was nice in a bizarre way to see people be like petty or just not understand each other, or having cultural differences that kind of created friction and tension.
Yeah, I really liked the scene with Mary and
Tamar?
Tamar.
I think it's Tamar.
Not sure. Yeah, could be, yeah. With those two, where they just don't sort of click, do they? And they keep sort of rubbing up against each other, and they kind of have it out and have a good chat with each other. And I mean, first of all, it means that it passes the Bechdel test.
Yes, that's a good
nice.
point. That is a good point.
Amen. Yes.
Yeah. And it's nice just to see women being actual 3D characters, and not being sort of perfect or villainized. And yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I want to talk about, following on from this sort of theme of why isn't God doing this for me, is talking about little James's lack of healing in this. Okay, so I love the bit where Jesus is sending them out, and it's a line of dialogue in the gospel where he's saying, go here, take nothing with you, and take no money, and
Wipe
all
the
this sort of
dust
stuff.
from your feet.
Wipe the dust from your feet.
I was like, oh, I know this. We've talked about this. I know things. It inspired me so much that I made Giles a meme about it. Because it happened a couple times. The other time was, when they take the grains of wheat on Shabbat because they're like so super hungry, and the Pharisees are like, you can't do this, and Jesus is like, David, and then goes on his merry way. I was like, oh, we covered this. I know this part now.
Nobody's ever made me a meme before. I was so touched by that. Don't worry, listeners, we will share that with you. Okay. So there's that brilliant bit where he's pairing them up, and he says, "Oh, little James, big James, you could make it a thing." It's so funny.
Yes.
There's the scene with little James, and to be clear, there's nothing biblical that suggests that little James has any kind of physical affliction. That aspect of it is a work of speculative fiction. Okay, just to help you kind of divvy up the what's canon and what's head canon, and there's the bit after they've had this commission to go out, and little James finds him and says, Rabbi, are you saying I have the power to heal people? He's like, yes. Me? Yes. And there's the conversation that started in season 2, but never quite. This is the culmination of it, where he's like, well, why haven't you healed me yet? And I typed up all of the sort of ensuing interaction because it was so beautiful. I just felt like I needed to sort of share all of it. So I'm going to do that now, if that's okay. So Jesus says to him, little James, precious little James, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm going to say defines your whole life to this point and will define the rest of your life. You understand? In the Father's will, I could heal you right now, and you would have a good story to tell, yes? Yes, that you do miracles. Yes, and that's a good story. But there are already dozens who can tell that story, and there will be hundreds more. Think of the story that you have specially in this journey to come if I don't heal you. And he goes, to know how to proclaim that you still praise God in spite of this, to know how to focus on all that matters so much more than the body, to show people that you can be patient with your suffering here on earth because you know you'll spend eternity with no suffering. Not everyone can understand that. How many people do you think the Father and I trust with this? Not many. And then James responds with, but the others, they're so much more stronger, better at this. And then Jesus says, James, I love you, but I don't want to hear that ever again. And then James says, I know I can hear the Psalm of David about I am beautifully and wonderfully made, but it doesn't make this any easier. It doesn't make me feel like any less of a burden. And then Jesus replies with, a burden? First of all, it's far easier to deal with your slow walking than it is to deal with Simon's temper. Trust me. Are you fast? Do you look impressive when you walk? Maybe not. But these are things that Father doesn't care about. You're going to do more for me than most people ever dream. So many people need healing in order to believe in me, or they need healing because their hearts are so sick. That doesn't apply to you. And many are healed or not because the Father in heaven has a plan for them, which may be a mystery. And we remember what Job said, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then there's this last bit, and I promise I'm going to finish after this. But he says, when you pass from this earth and you meet your Father in heaven, where Isaiah promises you will leap like a deer, your reward will be great. So hold on a little longer. And when you discover yourself finding true strength because of your weakness, when you do great things in my name in spite of this, the impact will last for generations. Do you understand? And that is some of the most beautiful writing I think I've ever heard in any piece of media. I thought that was absolutely beautiful. As somebody who is reminded of their disability the moment they open their eyes, and for somebody who believes in Jesus and believes that you can be healed and has seen that happen with other people, that aspect to where you're like, why not me? And obviously we then get into the question of, like, if God is real, why do bad things happen? And better minds than me have spent the better part of 2 millennia trying to come up with a decent answer to that and not found anything. But this made me feel like when I was watching The Shack, and you would hear lines in that you almost wish were scripture. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because they were so beautiful, they're so coherent. I loved it.
The "I love you, but never say that again" line is like yoink. That's now in my vocabulary, because I think it's just a perfect response to anybody who says things about themselves negatively. I love you, but I never want to hear that again. It's just so it's so lovely. It was a really, really touching scene.
And this is a funny one, but that actually kind of reminds me of my dad. As I've said on this show before, I don't really have a relationship with my dad, and basically if I can find an opportunity to trash him, I will, because he flipping deserves it. But there was one time I had a really tumultuous start to my teaching career. I was in a really toxic school, and they were gonna fail me, and the way your NQT works, if you fail your 3 terms, that's it. You can never teach again, And being in that kind of environment, living on my own, and all the rest of it had this very gradual effect on me, where you've not got... Nowadays, if somebody said, oh, you're a rubbish teacher, I'd be like, okay, well, with most heartfelt respect, screw you. But in your NQT, in your first year of teaching, you don't know that you're not, And it had an impact on my self-esteem, and I left that school as a quivering mess, and it made me feel like I wasn't any good for anything, And I remember I was down at my dad's, and I said something about myself, something like, "Oh yeah, but I'm rubbish. I'd be no good at that," or whatever my opinion's worth. And my dad just looks at me straight in the eye and says, "Don't ever say that about yourself again," And I swear I was going to make this the happy fun episode.
I think to see that emulated by Jesus, I think, isn't that not just, at least from what you've educated me on in this whole season, is that Jesus is love, and Jesus, that's his whole shtick, right? And so that scene, I think, that's his thing. That's his, Big James, Little James, that's the thing. Jesus is love, that's his thing. I think The Chosen does such a good job of showing how loving Jesus was as a person in different ways, and that scene, I think, is one that will really stick with a lot of people, because I think the conundrum of, well, why is one person done something that I've not been able to do, and why has one person been healed over me, and that's always going to be something tough to try and understand and try and deal with, I think.
I think there's another layer to this, which is that, if we think that we live in an ableist society now, the time of Jesus was even worse, to the point where if people were ill, it was blamed on their own sin. So you deserve to be ill. For Jesus to go, it's not an issue. It's okay that you are okay. I can still use you. You're not being punished. You're not a bad person. That actually it kind of cuts down that kind of ableist mentality of, I will use you and you will be powerful. The fact that you have a disability is irrelevant to that, and I accept you for who you are is challenging now, but completely radical at the time. So you have to see that in context.
I think it goes for psychological scars as well as physical ones. The physical ones might be easier to see and the rest of it, but it's, in a lot of cases, you can see how the pain that you've gone through can help other people. What's the phrase I like? One day your story will be somebody else's self-help manual or something like that. And again, to use yet another West Wing metaphor, it's the story about the guy who falls down the hole. He calls up for help. A doctor walks by and a doctor throws down a prescription. He sees a priest walk by, and the priest sort of says a prayer for him and walks on. And then he sees his best friend walk by, and the best friend jumps in the hole with him. He says, "Why did you do that? That was ridiculous. Now we're both stuck down here." And the best friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out. Follow me." And I tend to feel that way with anybody who's dealing with any kind of work-related stress where they feel like they've been chipped away. I feel like I'm like the patron saint of struggling NQTs, you know what I mean?
And actually, that's why I think it's really interesting that they've got the boat miracle in this, because I think, for me as a non-religious person, I don't see that the most interesting part of that is a miracle. I see it as metaphorical. And I think that actually this is the idea that you are going to hit really stormy times and you're going to feel like you're sinking. And that's that kind of emotional healing that is required. And actually what Jesus doesn't do is calm the storm. He doesn't he doesn't take the problem away, but actually
he does after he's proved his point.
That's
what's fascinating.
But actually there's for me a much more interesting analysis, which is just, this is about putting your faith in something that's going to hold you above water when you're struggling.
It reminds me of the scene with the woman who is bled for 12 years, who I assume has some kind of endometriosis or similar, where Jesus explains when she touches the fringe of his robe that it was her faith alone that was able to heal that for her, rather than him doing that for her, which I thought was really interesting. That whole double part I thought was really, as a woman, I thought was really interesting. I did not expect to have like periods covered in the like life of Jesus. I wasn't expecting that. So I think
and
that
again,
was
particularly because of the Jewish relationship with blood, that you were seen as unclean, and so actually there's again that second layer of a woman who was unclean touching Jesus.
Not only have you got to live with this horrible, debilitating illness, you're also a total outcast from society.
Yeah.
And I've always loved in that story that Jesus calls her daughter. I don't think he uses that term for anybody else. I think she's the only one, and it must have been so meaningful for her, for him to use that word.
Coming back to the walking on water bit, though, like the bit where they see something and then there's a flash of light and you just see Jesus' silhouette as he's walking towards them over a cresting wave. That was just pure cinema.
Yeah,
like
you understand why now in the Bible when it says the disciples were terrified.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, no, that is actually really scary.
And it's interesting how there's always like different. The more you dig into this, the more you pick out the layers to these things. So, for example, the Sunday school version of this is you talk about how Peter, how his faith wavered, and how he started to sort of to sink and start to drown, and the rest of it. But when you become an adult, you realise Peter's the only one who had the guts to get out of the boat in the first place. Do you know what I mean? This is the thing I've always loved about Simon, is the fact that he's willing to just throw himself out there and he'll just figure it out as he goes along.
And it's just interesting back to what Andy was saying, that they enjoyed filming that. It sounded horrendous. Like just 4 days you have to keep jumping in a freezing cold but getting out dry, jumping back in again. That takes a lot of grace. So
See, you might be talking to the wrong people, because like me and Julia are actors at heart, so that's like, yeah, I'm down for that.
Man, no.
I think for me, I'd be down for that for like a day. And then, I hate being cold. I hate being cold. Like I think I'm one of the very few people who would rather be too warm than too cold.
Yeah.
Like, you know the bit in Harry Potter where Ron talks about the Dementors and he's like, I felt like I would never be happy again. That's how I feel when I'm cold. So
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
So I think one day I could do, or if it was maybe like a heated pool, I don't know, like a balmy kind of, 20 degrees or whatever, something like that. I could do it.
Really hot weather.
Yeah. But freezing cold rain.
The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't have any set answers on this one, is in the first episode of season 3, Judas meets Jesus. He's already been introduced by season 2, and we see the two of them in the same place at the same time. And this is where we definitely get into Christian headcanon, because there's no wrong answers here, but do you think Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him at that point?
My gut says yes.
Louisa
yes.
says yes.
Yeah.
I think no.
Claire says no.
I don't think so. But then it's difficult because the whole of season 3, he's always kind of hinting, and even a little bit before season 3, he's hinting that he's not going to be here the whole time. Like, I forget, it might be to Shmuel, just after the feeding of the 5,000, where he's like, oh, you've lost something, and Shmuel's like, oh, well, what are you losing? And he goes, time. Like, he's fully aware that he's not, he's not gonna live possibly for much longer. But for me, I feel that's he's more preoccupied with that than where that's gonna come from. It's gonna happen, but he's not kind of sure when or by what means.
But then I guess this is a question of, if Jesus is fully God and fully human. If he's fully God, he's all-knowing. So by that logic, he has to know what is going to happen. It's not as though, he's like 31 and God says, just to let you know, you're going to die. He
By the way.
that was not brand new information to him. So I think you either got to see that Jesus didn't know anything or he knew everything.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's the case at all. So, and again, no wrong answers on this one. But how could you physically pack being God into one body and one mind? How could you, being like the human brain is finite, you know, it's a squishy mass in there, and if you knew every single atom in every single object that ever was all the time, how would you have space in your brain just to form words?
Yeah, despite being fully God, I don't think that necessarily means he fully has everything God knows.
So the way I imagine it, right, if you imagine at this point Jesus can ask God anything and God will give him the answer, you know? So it's a bit like being in a library where you have access to all this information, but you don't know all that information all in one go.
But at the Last Supper, he knew what Judas was going to do.
Yeah, at the Last Supper he knew. That wasn't. I wasn't saying did he never know. What I'm saying is, can you love somebody and have them be your follower and really sincerely love them if you know what they're going to do to you? And the part of this is comes into a dramatic conceit now, because if you look at the way Jonathan Rumi plays that scene and the way they script it, is Jesus is looking at him and seems a bit skeptical, but that doesn't necessarily mean he knows that Judas is going to betray him. That just means that
we know that he's going to betray him, almost, isn't
it?
Well,
there was a bit where
we know. So there's the dramatic. I've always been a bit of a Judas apologist on this, because I always felt like if he'd been able to hold on that little bit longer, then I reckon he would have been brought back into the fold and
also
loved and forgiven.
There was a plan. There's a plan of salvation where Jesus had to die, and Judas is part of that plan. Yeah. In that, you know, it, and that I remember studying in this at university that actually Judas was instrumental in the salvation of mankind, because he initiated the whole arrest and crucifixion. And so, you know, if Jesus did know what Judas was going to do, it's a human narrative of that, to say that actually there's no way he could have been, you know, loved him or whatever if he knew what he was going to do. Yeah. Yes, he could, if he knew that was part of the plan. I think it's Peter. I think Peter's the one that I think was much, you know, betrayed him much more than Judas, because I think I don't think Judas fully understood what he was doing. I think he probably thought, can you just let us know where Jesus is? We'll pay 30 pieces of silver for your time. I don't think he was planning to dob him in so he would get crucified. I don't think any of the disciples had any idea what was going to happen. And that's why when Jesus did get killed, he was like, okay, I'm done, I'm out. I don't think he realised. Whereas Peter, I think, was much more consciously denying him.
Also, people who don't have a guilty conscience, people who didn't love the person that they've had a hand in destroying, don't kill themselves. You know, if he was a true villain through and through, he would be like, ha 30 shekels, let's go to Butlins.
I'm not sure I'm completely convinced that Judas didn't know that it would somehow lead to harm for Jesus, because I think they would have known that they were kind of out to get him, but I can definitely buy that he didn't think it would go as far as it did. kind of
but
thing.
Also they're Jewish authorities, and they were human and they were terrified, and so he's going to think, well, if I don't do this, what's going to happen to me, you know? And I think sometimes we do things and then we look back and go, and people go to us, what did you think was going to happen? You're like, I think about it now, you're right, you know. I'm the same as you. I'm a Judas apologist.
At the beginning, where Simon is like gonna potentially betray the Jewish merchants to the Roman authorities because they're fishing on Shabbat, and it's like he he doesn't want to do it, but if in Simon's case, he's in a desperate situation, right? So I think you can, I can easily see how you could feel bad for Judas. But I'm interested to see where this goes, because obviously I only have a very, very passing knowledge of Judas and what he does.
Jesus dies. Just don't want to spoil it.
You're kidding. You're kidding me. Right?
Spoiler alert.
Damn it, Lou.
Well, that's ruined. That's
Can you be
ruined for
cool?
me now.
Can I talk about? Can I talk
Go for
about
it.
the feeding of the 5,000? Because
Go for it.
I think what I really loved in the way that they did this is it was a real nod to multiculturalism, and it was a real nod to racism, and that 2,000 years later we've still got the same old gripes. You look different. You do things different to me. And actually there's that unification moment where they're all unified by this kind of shared experience, and that I really loved. And again, I'm always going to have like a non-religious take on it. For me, that was much more miraculous than everybody getting something to eat. I love that.
Yeah. I did like the bit where this witness is being grilled by Shmuel, and he's like, "Oh, what's happened here? And the guy's like, "Mate, he's just multiplied all this bread and fish," and Shmuel's like, "He broke bread with Gentiles," and the guy goes off like, "Oh, he doesn't care that he's heard a miracle. He just cares who he ate it with." And I think that really encapsulated the whole point. And
I think that this underlines a thing where I've had this in the past where people have said, if I met Jesus, if I got to see him face to face, I'd believe in him. I'm like, no, I don't actually think you would, because there were plenty of people who did see him face to face, and they were like, I didn't feel it,
And that's why I think like sometimes these miracles are not necessarily clear cut. Like for me, that was a miracle of generosity. That I think a small boy was willing to share the food that he had. And then actually people were inspired by that generosity, and everybody shared the food that they had, and then there was enough food, But I know obviously the religious reading is that Jesus prayed over it and it multiplied. And if Jesus is God and God is all powerful, there's no reason why that couldn't logically happen. But I just think I'm always interested in those like layers of interest.
Yeah.
Human
that
interest.
is a theory I've heard before, and I think out of all of Jesus' miracles, that's probably the most explicable. The feeding 5,000.
I love the way we're like, how are we going to get everyone to hear? But you just stand around, listen to what I say, you say it to your little bit, and when he's delivering it, you could hear the little people in the background go just repeating what he was saying. I was like, oh, actually, that's a really nice touch. Really love that.
Yeah.
Ye olde speaker system.
Well, if you're friends with techies, then the thing that confounds them is how does Jesus talk to 5,000 people without a mic?
Yeah. And that, the makers of this are just going, we'll just give an option, to make this plausible.
Absolutely. We're gonna.
I know you're gonna want to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Just another small point. I'll
Darling,
make it very quickly.
You say whatever you want to say.
I quite liked the little theme they had running through series 3 about like money and enterprise and how they were going to fund stuff. With the little kind of business that the women are getting involved in, they're being quite enterprising, and I think that's really cool. And also that kind of ties in with Judas a little bit and what's going to happen with him, and you see him kind of worrying about money and him taking his little share at the end there. And you just see how it kind of sneaks into stuff, because Jesus is like, it'll figure itself out, but other people are like, oh, but that's really stressful. Will it though? We need to find a way to fund this, and because that like money flipping creeps into everything and corrupts everything, and you can see it happening. So I find that really interesting.
I do sympathise, because I think if I was with Jesus, I would be stressed, because I need a plan. So when he's like, so just go to the next town, don't take a bag. I need my inventory slots. I can't not take a bag with me, Jesus. I would be a terrible disciple. I would be the worst.
Yeah. It's like, no, I need my stuff.
We are going to. How am I going to eat? What am I going to do?
We are going to cut this episode here because I am the poor soul that has to edit this thing. Okay. And I've only got a week to put 2 episodes together. So please, everyone, stop talking and save your insights for the chosen season 4. And I will see you all here in a year's time, okay?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Claire, have you had a good time?
I've had a wonderful time, thank you.
Louise, have you had a good time?
Jesus and TV, come on. I'm always having a good time with those two things.
Juliet, have you had a good time?
I've had a fantastic time, as always.
Fantastic. Cassidy, have you had a good time?
His face isn't telling us that he has.
It's not a good look, is it? It's not a good look. Okay. He'll come round.
I think he needs to poop. It's a good.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have been, thank you so much for listening. It is really flipping late now, so we are going to finish this and get ourselves to bed because we have a toddler who will not take any excuses. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know when the next episode's going to be. I don't know what it's going to be on, but I know it's going to be brilliant, and I hope to see you there. Bye.
Bye. God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Gough.
That's me.
Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Natalie Miniker.
Please rate and review.
Please give us 5 stars because that's a nice thing to do.